This is the story of how I almost died. My junior year of my undergraduate degree, I took a class called Biodiversity and Conservation in Asia, where over spring break we went on a short study abroad to India to see all of the amazing animals that were there. Now, after we went to India, 6 of us continued on to go to Nepal, and we went without our professors, knowing nobody there. Krishna picked us up at the airport. He was our guide for the trip. Now, the reason that we went to Nepal without our professors and without other people was to go to Chitwan National Park, which is right at the base of the Himalayas. Now, the reason that we went to this particular national park is this mountain range is one of the only places in the world to see the Indian rhino. And so we went, and the first day that we were there was very short. We had just missed the Holi festival in Kathmandu. And then we went down into the valley the next day where they were still celebrating Holi. And we celebrated with the villagers, and we had a fantastic time on our way to our hotel. Once we were at our hotel, we very quickly unloaded and we went out to see our first safari. And we saw rhinos that very first day near Chitwan National Park. However, we hadn't gone into the park itself. That was supposed to happen the next day. So, that night I went to bed ready and excited to go into the park and see the rhinos and all of the amazing animals that were there. Except that night I woke up about 2 a.m. violently ill. Now, some places in the world they call it things like the Pharaoh's curse or Montezuma's revenge. But having just come back from India, I knew that I had what they call Delhi belly. And I was not feeling very good. By the time the morning came around, I was sleep deprived, but my stomach was much more settled. And I was trying to ignore the fact that I had a 102-degree Fahrenheit fever. So I was not in a good place to go into the national park. But this was our only chance to go into Chitwan National Park. And I was not going to let that chance pass me by. So we got to the river that separated us from Chitwan National Park, and we piled into this canoe. So on the way across the river, one of my friends, they look at me and they say, what about the gharial? Like, if we fall into the river, will the gharial, this type of crocodile, will they eat us? The guide reassures us, says, they eat fish, it's not going to be a big deal, it'll all be fine. What you really need to worry about is the muggers, the mugger crocodiles. Those are the ones that'll eat you. So I'm sitting here in a boat that's kind of going back and forth, and I'm already not feeling great, and everything's dizzy, and the world's spinning, and I've had way more Advil than I'm supposed to. But we make it across the river just fine, even though I feel quite bad at this point. And we pile in this Jeep and we head through the Nepali jungle through Chitwan National Park, and we end up at this abandoned hotel. So when they were making this national park initially, there were still hotels and other resorts in the area, but the Nepali government was trying to minimize the amount of impact people have on the national park, and they decided that these hotels would no longer be used. This did not mean that they demolished the hotels. Instead, they just left them abandoned to fall apart on their own. So we set up and we have lunch at this abandoned hotel. We have a good time ahead of us. We see these elephants that they bring in that work with the rangers, and we learn all about the ranger and the elephants' partnerships as they go through the jungle trying to protect all of the animals that live there. And as we're getting ready to go on a hike through the Nepali jungle, we're given hiking sticks, and one of my classmates looks at the guide and says, what if we run into a tiger? What are we supposed to do? Now, I used to work as a zookeeper, as an intern, with tigers. And one of the things that stuck in my mind the most was how they hunt. First of all, they are very good ambush predators. This right here is a picture of a tiger that I took while we were in India. It's very hard to see it. So they wait, they sit, and when the prey is not paying attention, they lunge out inserting their canine teeth between the vertebrae in their prey's neck, killing it instantly. Now, we're sitting here thinking, okay, great, we're about to go into the jungle, there's tigers here. The ranger says, well, you got a stick, so you use the stick to defend yourself from the tiger. Keep in mind that I'm really sick. Everything's spinning, I can't even walk straight, much less fight off a tiger with a stick. So at this point I think, great, but we haven't seen any tigers so far in Nepal. We only saw them in India, so I'm feeling a little bit better. And then another one of the girls in our class says, what about rhinos? Like, we haven't seen the tigers since being in Nepal, but we have seen the rhinos since we've been here. The guy says, they're very slow to turn around. You just run behind a tree, and then when they charge, you run behind another tree because they're just really bad at turning. So if I'm not going to be able to fight off the tiger with a stick, I'm definitely not going to be able to run in a straight line behind trees to try and save myself. Like I said, I can't even walk straight without paying a lot of attention to where I'm going. Running in a straight line, trying to run from tree to tree to tree, I'm not going to be able to get away from the rhino. And then one last question came up from someone in our group. And they said, what about the sloth bear? Now, when people think of sloth bears, they very rarely think of our lovely friend Baloo. So Baloo's actually based on a sloth bear, although he's never portrayed as one. Sloth bears usually have this white ring that goes right down around the chest, and they've got very long claws. They're insectivores, so they mostly eat insects. Sometimes they have fruit and honey, much like Baloo, but insects are primarily a part of their diet. Unlike Baloo, they're not very friendly. So Baloo would give you a big hug and sing about being in the jungle, and it would be great. But a real sloth bear, if you startle it, they will attack. So they're very dangerous, especially in the jungle. And that's when our guide says, oh yeah, you climbed the tree to get away from the sloth bear. And a few of us are sitting here thinking, well, sloth bears climb trees, so I don't know how that's going to help us. God says, well, you climb a tree that's big enough for you to climb, but small enough that the sloth bear cannot climb the tree. So I have a stick for the tigers. I'm going to run behind the trees for the rhinos, if I can even run. And for the sloth bear, I'm going to climb a tree, if we encounter one. I don't think, in my condition, I'd be able to do any of those things. But nonetheless, we set out into the Nepali jungle, and I've got my stick, and everything's gonna be just fine. Now, as we go along our trip, I see all sorts of amazing things that the guide points out. I see things like little birds I never would have seen anywhere else. I see the antlers that the deer have sloughed off and are getting ready to grow a new pair. I've seen areas where the rhinos have rubbed their horns up against the trees. And at some point, our guide points to something and says, oh, look, you see right there where the sloth bear has slashed that tree with its claws. I'm thinking, this is awesome, this is so cool. I'd only seen one sloth bear before. It was in India, and it was so brief because they're very fast animals. And I just saw a black blur. So I'm thinking, okay, this is really awesome, this is the closest thing that I'll see to a sloth bear. And we keep going, and eventually he points at this, and he says, does anyone know what this is? We don't. He says, well, that's the sloth bear's den. Okay. Sloth bear den, that's cool. Yeah, that's really cool, But that means the sloth bear's in the area, and like I said, I don't think I'm ready to climb a tree. I definitely don't have that in me. I'm dizzy, I'm following the guide. The guide is the closest person to me. I'm right behind him, because I figured at this point, if I'm going down, he's going to go down with me. And as we continue through the jungle, we make this turn to head back towards the hotel. And we're going along this cliff. So there's this big cliff to the right, and to the left of us is this forest. And we hear something crash down at the bottom of the cliff. And our guide stops. and I'm the only person close enough to hear what he says. And he says, God, sloth bear. And at that point, my heart stopped. I didn't know what I was going to do. I couldn't climb a tree. I was one step away from toppling off this cliff to an already startled sloth bear who had already known that we were there. My heart was racing. I was sweating. I had that fever. I couldn't walk straight. I couldn't think straight. And then it was gone. And we make our way back to the hotel. And I think to myself, back to when we ate lunch with some of the rangers at the park and their elephants. They go out there every single day and face tigers and rhinos and sloth bears. But the biggest thing that they face is other people. They kill more rangers in Nepal and in India every year than all three of those animals combined. So on our way back to the hotel, I think to myself how grateful I am that I'm not worried about those rangers, and I got a chance to see all of these amazing animals while I was on my trip. Thank you.